I woke up because something was wrong. Not because of a sound, not because of a dream, but because my body knew it was being watched. The clock beside my bed glowed 3 a.m. exactly. The room was silent, too silent. And at the foot of the bed, where the darkness gathered thickest, something felt present. There was no face, no movement, just the sensation of awareness. Then it was gone. Later, I would understand why that moment stayed with me, why stories like this don't fade with time. Because some histories don't announce themselves with noise or spectacle. They live in the spaces between moments, in the weight of silence, in the memory of people who learned how to move through the world without being seen. This story isn't about ghosts. It's about men who were so disciplined, so patient, and so skilled at surviving war that their enemies believed they were something else entirely. And to understand them, we have to go back to 1943. Before we dive in, here's how Echoes Beneath works. I explore the historical stories that fascinate me and share them like a real conversation with friends. If that's your vibe, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Now, back to the tale. By late 1943, the Allied advance through Italy had slowed to a crawl. The German Wehrmacht had transformed the mountains into fortresses. The Winter Line, also known as the Gustav Line, stretched across central Italy like a stone wall. It wasn't just trenches and barbed wire. It was a system of bunkers blasted directly into rock, supported by artillery hidden in the cliffs. The terrain itself had become the enemy. Rain turned valleys into swamps. Roads vanished under mud. Tanks were useless on slopes so steep that even mules struggled. Every advance cost lives, and every gain was measured in yards. At the center of this nightmare stood places that would become infamous. Mount Lungo, Mount Samucro, San Pietro Infine. And in the middle of it all stood the 45th Infantry Division. The 45th Infantry Division was a National Guard unit made up largely of men from Oklahoma, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. Its symbol, the Thunderbird, had been adopted in 1939, replacing an earlier insignia that too closely resembled a swastika. What made the 45th unique wasn't just its toughness, it was its people. More than 2,500 Native American soldiers served in its ranks: Apache, Pawnee, Choctaw, Comanche, Muscogee, Creek, Kiowa, and others. Some came from reservations, some from boarding schools. Many had grown up in rural environments where reading land, weather, and silence was part of daily life. They weren't recruited for mysticism. They were recruited because they were good soldiers, but war has a way of turning skill into legend. Among the men of the 45th were scouts, whose abilities seemed almost unnatural to those around them. They could move across rock without dislodging stone, navigate terrain in total darkness, read enemy movement from disturbances most soldiers missed, remain motionless for hours without fatigue. These skills weren't learned in boot camp. They came from hunting traditions, tracking knowledge, and survival practices passed down through generations. Many had grown up learning how to move quietly, not because it was impressive, but because it was necessary. To the army, they were scouts. To the men who served beside them, they were something else. They were the ones sent ahead when maps failed, the ones who found paths through cliffs, the ones who returned when others didn't. By September 1943, the 45th was fighting through the Volturno Line, pushing toward the mountains guarding the Liri Valley, the gateway to Rome. German defenses were layered and precise. Machine gun nests were hidden inside rock. Observation posts overlooked every approach. Any movement during daylight was suicidal. so the fighting shifted to the night. And that's when the reputation began. German patrols reported movement they couldn't explain. Positions they were certain were secure were suddenly compromised. Outposts went silent without gunfire. Later reports described the same unsettling pattern. No sound, no warning, no visible attackers, only the realization that someone had been there. It wasn't magic. It was discipline. The scouts moved only when wind moved. They froze when it stopped. They used artillery fire to mask steps. They understood that the battlefield itself could be used as cover. The Germans began to fear the night, not because of superstition, but because they no longer trusted their own senses. The village of San Pietro in Fine became one of the bloodiest engagements of the Italian campaign. The Germans had fortified the town, embedding artillery into stone buildings and using elevation as a weapon. Civilian homes became firing positions. Civilians were trapped in the crossfire. Repeated Allied assaults failed. The ground was so churned by explosions that bodies could not be recovered. Soldiers described the mud as alive, swallowing the wounded where they fell. During this period, native scouts from the 45th were used for reconnaissance missions, so dangerous they rarely appeared in official reports. They mapped enemy positions. They identified supply routes. They observed without engaging. Some accounts tell of scouts entering German-held areas and leaving signs, not as threats, but as psychological pressure. A moved object, a footprint where none should be. The effect was devastating. German units began reporting a constant sense of being watched. Morale collapsed. Patrols refused to advance at night. This wasn't superstition. It was exhaustion meeting fear. One of the most important truths of this story is this: these men were not immune to fear. They carried it differently. By early 1944, the 45th had been fighting almost continuously for months. Casualties were high, sleep was rare, stress was constant. Yet many native soldiers endured in ways that puzzled Army doctors. Later studies would suggest that cultural frameworks, rituals, spiritual grounding, community identity helped some soldiers process trauma differently. Not better, not easier, differently. Many returned to prayer, some returned to ceremony. Some simply walked alone for long periods of time. They were not unaffected. They were carrying weight that had no language in military manuals. After San Pietro, the 45th was sent to Anzio, one of the most brutal campaigns of the war. Here, the Germans held the high ground. Allied forces were trapped on a narrow coastal plain under constant artillery fire. The men lived in holes in the earth for months. The scouts continued their work, moving through marshes, observing enemy movement, and relaying information that kept entire units alive. German soldiers later described a sensation they couldn't explain, the belief that Allied troops were already behind them. There was no single ghost unit. There was only pressure, fatigue, and fear multiplying itself. On April 29, 1945, the 45th Infantry Division reached Dachau. Nothing in their training prepared them for what they found. Rail cars filled with bodies, survivors barely alive, a scale of cruelty that defied comprehension. Many native soldiers later said this moment changed them permanently. Some saw echoes of their own people's history. Others simply saw the worst thing humans could do to one another. For men who had survived years of combat, Dachau was something else entirely. The war ended soon after, but for many of them, it never truly ended. When the 45th returned home, there were no parades for many of its native soldiers. Some returned to reservations where they still could not vote. Some returned to poverty. Some carried wounds, physical and invisible, that would follow them for life. The Army studied combat stress in the years that followed, slowly forming what we now recognize as PTSD research. Native veterans were often cited for their resilience, but rarely asked why. The truth was simple. They had always known how to survive hardship, but survival leaves scars. Over time, stories grew. Stories of men who vanished into the dark. Stories of soldiers who could not be seen. Stories of warriors who walked like spirits. But the truth is more powerful than the myth. They weren't ghosts. They were men who mastered patience, men who understood terrain, men who carried responsibility without complaint, men who fought for a country that did not yet fully accept them. Their legacy isn't supernatural, it's human, and it's one of the most important chapters of World War II that few people are ever taught. If you ever feel the weight of history in a quiet place, if you ever stand somewhere and feel like you're not alone, remember this: some people don't vanish when wars end. They remain in the land, in memory, in the lives they saved. Not as ghosts, but as proof of what human beings are capable of when courage, culture, and discipline walk together. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below your thoughts or which part of this history surprised you the most. Every click helps keep these real stories alive because truth is more powerful than myth.